So I think everybody's probably very happy with how CKUT has evolved over the years from what you guys set up initially and hoped to do with it. 36 years later, we're all still here. Well, you're not here. You're here today with us, but I
In
think
the
you're
earthly
still with
realm.
us somewhere inside you. You're still with CKUT, I think. Radio. I think you were passionate about it then. I think you're still passionate about media and radio and the importance of stations like this. You talked a little bit about that. What do you feel is the future of these types of radio stations? We've seen reported on some stories recently of campus stations being closed, not receiving funding or not meeting CRTC guidelines. How important is it for us to keep these types of stations going?
I mean, so important is the short answer. The longer answer is I'm not involved enough to know in all the individual ins and outs of every case. But I do know that campus community is a hard form of radio that is much harder in a lot of ways than commercial radio. Commercial radio knows why it exists. It exists to make money and it hires people and it can manage continuity and all of those sorts of things because of that. Campus community radio is it's far harder because of the very nature of where it's based. People are around for a few years and then they move on to something else. They very often are people who have other things on their plate as well. This is not their full-time job in many cases to do this. But they're also campus community radio, I think is closer to the ground in terms of picking up trends and new thought that might be going on. And that kind of response to a newer way of thinking is very often viewed as radical, as somehow wrong because it's not the status quo. And it just makes it harder and harder to find your way. You know, I mentioned before when we were on that we had the Prisoners' Rights show and we had all of these shows that were very controversial. We had to walk a fine line with those shows. We had to make sure that they were informative and they allowed for a point of view, but that they didn't make false claims about things, that they didn't try to incite certain action. And we find ourselves living in a time now where we're not really good at those distinctions. It's so confusing that people are still debating whether or not Donald Trump incited an insurrection, and if he did, was he actually president? As president, was he an officer of the government when he did it? I mean, we're trying to figure our way through so many things, and campus community is kind of on the front lines with that. And they do it without the benefit of paid advice and consultations from other people who have been through it. So it doesn't surprise me to that they find themselves vulnerable. And I think if you have an opportunity to support campus community radio, it's really important to do that because I can't think of another network of radio stations in Canada that's providing anywhere near the breadth of information and exposure to what real life is about for so many people as campus community radio does.
It also offers other alternatives to just things like music. I mean, we have a couple shows that have been on the station as long as International Radio Report for from the beginning of CKUT. Positive Vibes, which is a reggae music
Yeah,
show, it's been
I
there. It
love
was
that
our
show.
neighbor, actually used to come on right after
Yes,
us when we were on Thursdays. I remember
yeah.
Janice running in like 30 seconds before the show started, and there was that transition between one show to the next, and it was always very tense waiting for Janice to show up. And Jazz Amok is another program, jazz music, which is still going at the station.
Uh,
And music wise, that's one thing that I really notice is the alternatives that it presents to people, the different types of music, different languages, different communities that are represented on a station. Again, that would not appear on commercial radio stations.
oh, absolutely. I'm so thankful because I didn't come from a back. I'm not entirely sure how I fell into CKUT as a matter of interest. I think I just started volunteering there because I wanted to get into radio at one point, and it opened my eyes. I've enjoyed a lifetime of musical exposure that probably wouldn't even have thought of without having been introduced to it at CKUT. Somebody was mentioning Tracy Chapman the other day, and I remember hearing Tracy Chapman before anybody knew much about her. She was there, and um, I remember she and Michelle Schock coming and having lunch with women at the station because they were doing a show in Montreal and so on. Just I again, that was well before they were well known elsewhere. And yeah, I and the variety of music we had on,
Oh,
everything from classical to Caribbean rhythms to, you
well,
know,
once I started at the station, a few years afterwards, my brother started doing two shows at the station on Sunday evenings. He started a show called Bluegrass Ramblings
oh yeah,
and Country Classics, which was all. I would never dare mention any of the new country to him because he would just go nuts. Like this was not country. This was, rock stars pretending to be country artists.
yeah.
So he would
You
take the
talk about
old,
Patsy Cline and Hank Snow.
exactly. He played
Yeah,
all that stuff, and the bluegrass music was totally unique. So, it gave people exposure to those, and those shows just attracted huge audiences. His shows, I fortunately somebody took them over when he stopped doing them, and they still exist at the station.
that's fantastic.
And
Yeah,
you
somebody
know,
was saying of TikTok. There's always generational talk on TikTok, and a millennial was saying, "We have exposure to so many things that you guys just didn't have the chance to." And I think, "Oh no, I had the chance, and I was really lucky. I came to
Yeah,
appreciate so
it's
much."
unfortunate that not enough people know about these radio stations, though. They are
Yeah,
trapped in the Virgin radios and the CJDs here
yeah,
in Montreal, and that's what they listen to. And
yeah,
I remember the light rock station, Ted Silver, who was the program director. He used to always tell me that if he ever found out that I was listening to his radio station, then he wasn't doing his job, which meant that he was playing a type of music that he knew I was not going to listen to, but his
right.
audience was going to be loyal to it. Because I used to call his programming oral wallpaper. That
Yeah,
it was just
exactly.
there. You sort of tuned in and tuned out. Maybe if you heard a song you recognized or something, you might not have known who the artist was or what the song title was, but you'd sing along, and then the next song you wouldn't even know what you had just heard, sort of thing.
Exactly.
So
I have
yeah.
to tell you that our sales manager early on, we had a few key bigger sponsors. One was Molson's, one was Sun Life. And
Mhm.
so he would go into Sun Life to just keep in touch and make sure that bring the ads up and so on and so forth. And it was hilarious because he'd walk in there, he'd say there'd be so many people with the radios on their desk listening to Dykes on Mics and this
Wow.
corporate environment, and there they were listening to CKUT. It always gave him a secret thrill.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah.
Jill, you came in late, obviously, to the
Yeah.
show, but you had listened to it beforehand. You knew the subject matter we were talking about, but it kind of took a little while for you to hook up with us, though.
Yeah, I started listening somewhere in the early 90s. I came across, and I think I saw maybe in the Messenger when I joined the CIDX Club. I think maybe a posting of, oh, on Sunday morning there's a show that talks about radio on 90.3 FM. I started listening, and it was pretty much every Sunday. And
Mhm.
I still remember listening in and saying, wow, that must be fun to be on a show to talk about radio on the radio.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
never thought I'd be actually on the show at some point in life, but it is. And I followed through. I followed through the changes when you went away. Then was Janice and all of that.
Yeah.
Also, it's interesting to see the changes because anybody that wants to have a glimpse of the past, you can go on the Internet Archive. There's a bunch of shows from the early 2000s, 2001, 2, 3. It's, I will say, very interesting to listen to them. They
I
are different than what we actually do today. And less international. It's interesting because we are much more international today on our show. And anyway, I joined the first time I went into the studio, which I thought was really cool, when CKUT and the show had the 30th anniversary. And I got into the studio, and then you said when I came out of the studio, Oh, you're welcome anytime. So it kind of stayed stuck in my head. I can come over anytime. Okay.
It's
That
lucky I meant it, because I don't think we would have got rid of you anyways. You would have kept showing up. So I do have an interesting thing in my hand here. You're talking about the YouTube archives. This little cassette, which you can't see on the radio, I'll hold it up to the microphone, but it is the recording of the first two shows from 1987. I am afraid to digitize these and give them to Jill because I can barely listen to them. They are so terrible, but they are documented on this little what is this, a BASF 90-minute cassette. So at some point I'll get up the nerve to digitize this and let the world hear it again. But I get through like about 2 minutes of it and I say, I can't do this. I can't expose people to this. But we did on that November the 19th, 1987, 36 years ago. And we've done a lot over the years. I'm proud of, that the show has kept going this long. How much longer it'll go, who knows? We keep changing as the medium changes. We've seen a lot of changes to international broadcasting, but we've seen some negative ones, but we've also seen some new developments in the way the programming is delivered to people now. There's numerous ways to get to it. I think I'll relate one funny story, though, about, I mentioned CKUT and people not knowing about it and whatever. I had a friend that had a flower shop in Montreal. They'd been in existence for decades. And come Valentine's Day and Mother's Day every year were the two busiest days of the year for them. And they'd always look for people to help them out doing deliveries on those days. So I had a van. So I would go on those 2 days and I'd help deliver the excess of flowers. I had this one big bouquet of flowers one day, delivering it into Westmount, Lower Westmount, ring the doorbell, open the door. And I was always very forward with people. I said, Madam, I have this beautiful bouquet of flowers for you. And she goes, I know you. And I said, I don't think so. Your voice. I know your voice. And I'm going like, well, wow. I said, maybe we work together somewhere. She says, on the radio. You're that guy that talks about radio. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I tune in every week and I listen to you. Some of it I understand, but most of it I don't. But I just like the way you guys just chatter up about radio. I thought, gee, I need 8x10 glossy pictures with autographs on them to hand out to people. But yeah, the power of radio and the reach of it,
it's been, and the thing about it is that's unusual because most of the time you have no idea how it's been received when you've been on the radio. And radio is such, we were talking about social media and TikTok and TV and so on and so forth. But to me, my first love has always been radio. And I think it's because you can get the same information in a very different way. It sort of comes inside your head and works inside your head in a really intimate way. And I haven't found another medium that makes me reflect the same way I do. It makes me feel like I've got friends in the people who are talking to me. I feel like I know them more than I do because of that. And I don't think that'll ever go away. I think there will always be people who value that.
Well, we get a lot of people in ourselves. We miss personality-driven radio. So much of it now is generic. You may have a morning show crew or a drive home crew, but the rest of the day is mostly voice tracked or syndicated shows or whatever. So you don't build up that connection to a personality. I think radio stations want to get away from that because personalities cost money, but they also bring in a lot of money. They bring in a loyal listenership. But so many stations are getting away from that. You have these companies that produce radio stations for people. You buy a service, you pick a DJ voice, you call the person whatever you want to call them, give them a tag, a name, and they pre-record your whole shows, leave gaps for you to slot in your local ads and your local weather or whatever, and then it's right back. I've heard the same guy on different radio stations across the country with a different name at each station. But it's just a voice that you buy a package and, you say, okay, we have a top 40 format. We want a DJ named Richard James. and do it. And they send
Yeah.
you a package, usually 3 or 4 weeks at a time, programmed for your station, and you can just insert. So you can go across the country and hear the same guy, but he's going to have a different name in each
Yeah.
city. That's,
And
I
the,
mean, that's taking personality out of it completely.
and the sadness of that is that that could disappear tomorrow and nobody would miss it.
Right.
And so we're become really bad in the world at taking care of the things we should be valuing. And radio, I agree with you. Radio is always about the people, and it's always you can't manufacture that thing that catches on with people, and people hear it in your voice. A roommate I had in Montreal, when I worked for CJAD and then CBC after leaving CKUT. And when I was at CBC, she said she was asking me about all these TV people and what they were like, and I said, "Why so much interest?" And she didn't have a TV at that point. They used to have a feed of the television news hour that would go in through the radio, and she'd listen to the radio. And she could hear in their voices so much more than people were seeing on television. She would say, that person sounds like they'd be a lot of fun, or that person sounds like they worry too much about things, or just these observations. And she was smack on with all of them. She was right. It's something more than what you thought you were hearing was conveyed.
Today you watch news stories on television, and it's a person at a desk with a video behind them, and they let that video present the story.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas radio, you have to paint that picture because there is no picture. The announcer has to elaborate on the story, has to detail it and explain it to you. And that's an art form, I think, that we're sadly losing because the generic radio stations just don't have that.
You're right. I think there's also something with our brain being distracted by a picture and the words that we're hearing. One of the things I do is create personal histories for people. So I interview them and then put together a documentary, basically, of their story and their life. And one of the things that I found with somebody who had dementia, her long-term memories were well intact, but by the time she got the finished product, she didn't remember having done the interview with me. But because it was her words describing her life, it provoked a whole lot of other memories that would not have been the same had I just described it to her. Because we create images in our head when we hear something.
Yep.
And her images made sense to her. They were all the words that she used, it was the way she remembered them, and they made sense. If I had described the same house and said, "Oh, it has 2 floors. It had 2 floors and this big wide staircase," and so that wouldn't have made the same sense to her because it wouldn't have created the same pictures. And so I think radio allows us to create those pictures in our head. And for me, I've just always been someone with those stuck with me more than any video I've ever seen.
Remember all the musicians that hated MTV and Much Music because they had to create a video to go with a song.
Exactly.
And they hated that connection that, forever that song would be connected with that image of that video. When often that video had absolutely nothing to do with the song itself.
Yeah, exactly. And when you talk about music, you're talking about how it resonates with people.
Yeah.
And so just the very act of them providing an image and saying, this is how it should resonate, kind of went against the grain anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope you're around for a long time doing this, Sheldon, because it thrills me no end to know that you're still there, it's still going, and it's still doing what it set out to do. It makes me feel kind of proud. I get to claim pride for all of your hard work.
But I have one thing I did, because when COVID hit and they shut down the station, we couldn't go there. That was a moment where Sheldon looked at me and said, "So what do we do now? Because if we can't go, do we put the show on hold?" And the first thing I thought was, if you put the IRR on hold, it's never going to come back. I could not see the show not coming back or not being there. So the first thing I thought on that week was, look, Sheldon, give me time to, I've never done, a recording online and use the software. And I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but we're going to do a show this week. I'm going to record it, and we're going to send it in, and we're going to do something. And the first one was extremely painful, by the way.
Kind of like this cassette will be when you hear it of the first show. That's painful as well.
So, but with time and because of the stuff I do on YouTube, well, I got an audio console and I got equipment that gave it the quality it needed.
Yeah.
And the recording and the experience that I got with the software and editing and everything. So I'm happy that I think that sometimes we say there's things that happen for a reason, and I got into the show in 2018, 17. I think about it now, and I'm like, well, I got into just the right time that something happened, and I had the technical know-how to help out and make the show continue. So I find it really, really cool for that.
Did we
The right
did we
person in the right
actually
place at the right time.
Yeah.
did we actually miss a show, or did we actually you got that first show together right after the station was shut down?
Yeah.
I think.
I remember we did the show in the afternoon. We started, and I had so much technical problems doing it. I told you, look, let me figure this out. We're gonna do it tonight. And I remember we were on Skype, and we shut down Skype, and I was like, oh God, what did I get into now?
Well, it all worked, and it's still working. We needed to have you, Sue, on this show, though. It was important to go back to the beginning, and you were there, and you were the ultimate person who said, "Yeah, go ahead." So we're really glad that you could come on the show and talk about it, and give us some additional material that we'll put onto the YouTube channel here.
Well, obviously, I was brilliant when I was young.
Still brilliant now. The voice is a radio. You have a voice for radio. Trust me, it is just great. So it'll be good to hear a professional voice on our show, because we're just rank 36-year amateurs on CKUT. So there you go. But,
it's an out of practice voice, so you're just fine. You're just fine. And it was really my pleasure to be here. I was so thrilled to see your message, and yeah, it's always good to talk about CKUT. One of the best things I've ever been involved with in my life. Yeah.
Well, Thanks very much for taking the time. We appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners will have some comments, and we'll do it again sometime. Maybe something's going on in the media that we want to talk to some more people about. We'll stay in touch.
I would love that. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.